Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, part of the Vedas, and it is translated and presented by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And it's presented like it's a story, but actually it's the verses in the Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada's presenting it like it's a story. He's giving us a summary, like a summary study of it. So it reads very nicely. And this is part 2. These are the prayers by the Personified Vedas. I believe that's what we're looking at here. It's the title of the chapter. Yeah. Okay. Continuing. The Vedic process is to gradually promote the conditioned soul, gradually from the mode of ignorance to the mode of passion, from the mode of passion to the mode of goodness. In the mode of goodness, there is sufficient light for understanding things as they are. For example, from earth a tree grows. From the wood of the tree, fire is ignited. In that igniting process, we first of all find the smoke, and then the next stage is heat, and then fire. When there is actually fire, we can utilize it for various purposes. Therefore, fire is the ultimate goal. Similarly, in the gross material stages of life, the quality of ignorance is very much prominent. Dissipation of this ignorance takes place in the gradual progress of civilization from the barbarian stage to the civilized life. When one comes to the form of civilized life, he is said to be in the mode of passion. In the barbarian stage, or in the mode of ignorance, the senses are gratified in a very crude way, whereas in the mode of passion, or in the civilized stage of life, the senses are gratified in a polished manner. But when one is promoted to the mode of goodness, one can understand that the senses and the mind are only engaged in material activities due to being covered by perverted consciousness. When this perverted consciousness is gradually transformed into Krishna consciousness, then the path of liberation is opened. So it is not that one is unable to approach the absolute truth by the senses and the mind. The conclusion is rather that the senses, mind, and intelligence in the gross stage of contamination cannot appreciate the nature of the absolute truth. But when purified, the senses, mind, and intelligence can understand what the absolute truth is. This purifying process is called devotional service or Krishna consciousness. And just a brief mention here, in part 1, Maharaj Parikshit asked the question of Sukadeva Goswami, but how is it possible to talk about or explain or approach the transcendence, which is beyond the material body and mind and senses, by using the material body, mind, and senses? And so this is Sukadeva Goswami's explanations, so that what we were just reading was in part answer to that question, by the gradual process of purification to the point of devotional service. So continuing, in the Bhagavad-gītā, it's clearly stated that the purpose of Vedic knowledge is to understand Krishna, and Krishna is understood by devotional service, beginning with the process of surrender. As stated in the Bhagavad-gītā, one has to think of Krishna always. One has to render loving service to Krishna always, and one always has to worship and bow down before Krishna. By this process only can one enter into the kingdom of God, without any doubt. When one is enlightened in the mode of goodness by the process of devotional service, he's freed from the modes of ignorance and passion. The word Atmane indicates the stage of Brahminical qualification in which one is allowed to study the Vedic literatures known as Upanishads. The Upanishads describe in different ways the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Lord. The Absolute Truth, the Supreme Lord, is called Nirguna. It does not mean that he has no qualities. It is only because he has qualities that the conditioned living entities can have qualities. The purpose of studying the Upanishads is to understand the transcendental quality of the Absolute Truth, as opposed to the material qualities of ignorance, passion, and goodness. That is the way of Vedic understanding. Great sages like the four Kumaras, headed by Shaunaka, followed these principles of Vedic knowledge and came gradually from impersonal understanding to the platform of personal worship of the Supreme Lord. It's therefore recommended that we must follow great personalities. Sukadeva Goswami is also one of the great personalities, and his answer to the inquiry of Maharaj Parikshit is authorized. One who follows in the footsteps of such great personalities surely walks very easily on the path of liberation and ultimately goes back home, back to Godhead. That is the way of perfecting this human form of life. Sukadeva Goswami continued to speak to Parikshit Maharaj. "My dear king," he said, "I will narrate in this regard a nice story. The story is important because it is in connection with Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This narration is a conversation between Narayan Rishi and the great sage Narada. Narayana Rishi still resides in Badarik Ashram in the Himalayan mountains and is accepted as an incarnation of Narayan. Once, when Narada, the great devotee and ascetic amongst the demigods, was traveling in different planets, he desired to personally meet the ascetic Narayan in Badarik Ashram and offer him his respects. This great sage incarnation of Godhead, Narayana Rishi, has been undergoing great penances and austerities from the very beginning of the creation in order to teach the inhabitants of Bharatavarsha how to attain the highest perfectional stage of going back to Godhead. His austerities and penances are exemplary practices for the human being. Badarik Ashram is situated in the northernmost part of the Himalayan mountains and is always covered with snow. Religious Indians still go to visit this place during the summer season when the snowfall is not very severe. Once the incarnation of God, Narayana Rishi, was sitting amongst many devotees in the village known as Palagram. Of course, these were not ordinary sages who were sitting with him, and the great sage Narada also appeared there. After offering his respect to Narayana Rishi, Narada asked him exactly the same question asked by King Parikshit of Sukadeva Goswami. When Narada asked this question of Narayana Rishi, the Rishi also answered by following in the footsteps of his predecessors. He narrated a story of how the same question had been discussed on the planet known as Janaloka. Janaloka is above the Svargaloka planets such as the Moon, Venus, etc. In this planet, great sages and saintly persons live, and they were also discussing the same point regarding the understanding of Brahman and his real identity. The great sage Narayan began to speak. "My dear Narada," he said, "I will tell you a story which took place long, long ago. There was a great meeting of the denizens of the heavenly planets and almost all of the important brahmacharis such as the four Kumaras, Sanat, Sanandana, Sanaka, and Sanat Kumar, attended. Their discussion was on the subject matter of understanding the Absolute Truth, Brahman. You were not present at that meeting because you went to see my expansion Aniruddha, who lives on the island of Svetadweep. In this meeting, all the great sages and brahmacharis very elaborately discussed the point about which you have asked me, and it was very interesting. The discussion was so delicate that even the Vedas were unable to answer the intricate questions that were raised. Narayana Rishi told Naradaji that the same question which Naradaji had raised had been discussed in that meeting in Janaloka. This is the way of understanding through the Parampara disciplic succession. Maharaj Parikshit was sent to Sukadeva Goswami. Sukadeva Goswami referred the matter to Narada, who had in the same way questioned Narayana Rishi, who had put the matter to still higher authorities in the planet of Janaloka, where it was discussed among the great Kumaras, Sanat, Sanatan, Sanat Kumar, and Sanandana. These 4 brahmacharis are recognized scholars in the Vedas and Shastras. Their unlimited volumes of knowledge, backed by austerities and penances, are exhibited by their sublime, ideal character. They are very amiable and gentle in behavior, and for them there is no distinction between friends, well-wishers, and enemies. Being transcendentally situated, such personalities as the Kumaras are above all material considerations and are always neutral in respect to material dualities. In the discussions held among the 4 brothers, one of them, namely Sanandana, was selected to speak, and the other brothers became the audience to hear him. Sanandana said, "After the dissolution of the whole cosmic manifestation, the entire energy and the whole creation in its nucleus form enters into the body of Garbhodakshai Vishnu. The Lord at that time remains asleep for a long, long time, and where there is again necessity of creation, the Vedas personified assemble around the Lord, begin to glorify him, describing his wonderful transcendental pastimes. It's exactly like a king when he's asleep in the morning. The appointed reciters come around his bedroom and begin to sing of his chivalrous activities, and while hearing of his glorious activities, the king gradually awakens. The Vedic reciters, or the personified Vedas, sing thus: O unconquerable Lord, you are the Supreme Personality. No one is equal to you or greater than you. No one can be more glorious in his activities. All glories unto you, all glories unto you. By your own transcendental nature, you fully possess all 6 opulences. As such, you are able to deliver all conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya. O Lord, we fervently pray that you kindly do so. All the living entities, being your parts and parcels, are naturally joyful, eternal, and full of knowledge, but, due to their own faults, they have tried to imitate you by trying to become the supreme enjoyer. Thus they disobey your supremacy and become offenders. And because of their offenses, your material energy has taken charge of them. Thus, their transcendental qualities of joyfulness, bliss, and wisdom have been covered by the clouds of the 3 material modes. The cosmic manifestation, made of the 3 material qualities, is just like a prison house for the conditioned souls. The conditioned souls are struggling very hard to escape from the material bondage, and according to their different conditions of life, they have been given different types of engagement. But all engagements are based on your knowledge. Pious activities can be executed only when inspired by your mercy. Therefore, without taking shelter at your lotus feet, one cannot surpass the influence of material energy. Actually, we, as personified Vedic knowledge, are always engaged in your service to help the conditioned soul understand you. This prayer of the Vedas personified illustrates that the Vedas are meant for helping the conditioned souls to understand Krishna. All the Shrutis, or personified Vedas, offered glories to the Lord again and again, singing Jai, Jai. This indicates that the Lord is praised for his glories. Of all his glories, the most important is his causeless mercy upon the conditioned souls in reclaiming them from the clutches of Maya. There are unlimited numbers of living entities in different varieties of bodies, some moving, some standing in one place, and the conditioned life of these living entities is due only to their forgetfulness of their eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the living entity wants to lord it over the material energy by imitating the position of Krishna, he is immediately captured by the material energy and according to his desire is offered a variety of 8,400,000 different kinds of bodies. Although undergoing the threefold miseries of material existence, the illusioned living entity falsely thinks himself the master of all he surveys. Under the spell of the material energy, which represents the threefold material qualities, the living entity is so entangled that it is not at all possible for him to become free unless he is graced by the Supreme Lord. The living entity cannot conquer the influence of the material modes of nature by his own endeavor, but because material nature is working under the control of the Supreme Lord, the Lord is beyond its jurisdiction. Except for him, all living entities, beginning from Lord Brahma down to an ant, are conquered by the contact of material nature. Because he possesses in full the six opulences of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, the Lord alone is beyond the spell of material nature. Unless the living entity is situated in Krishna consciousness, he cannot approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet the Lord, by his omnipotency, can dictate from within as the Supersoul. In the Bhagavad-gītā, the Lord advises, "Whatever you do, do for me. Whatever you eat, first of all, offer to me. Whatever charity you want to give, first give it to me. Whatever austerities and penances you want to perform, perform them for me." In this way, the karmis are directed to gradually develop Krishna consciousness. Similarly, Krishna directs the philosophers to approach him gradually by discriminating between Brahman and Maya. And at last, when one is mature in knowledge, he surrenders unto Krishna. As Krishna says in Bhagavad-gītā, "After many, many births, the wise philosopher surrenders unto me." The yogis are also directed to concentrate their meditation upon Krishna within the heart. And by such a continued process of Krishna consciousness, the yogi can become free from the clutches of material energy. But, as is stated in Bhagavad-gītā, because the devotees are engaged in devotional service with love and affection from the very beginning, the Lord directs them so that they can approach him without difficulty or deviation. Only by the grace of the Lord can the living entity understand the exact position of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The statements of the personified Vedas give clear evidence that the Vedic literature is presented only for understanding Krishna. It is confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā that through all the Vedas it is Krishna alone who has to be understood. Krishna is always enjoying, either in the material world or in the spiritual world, because he is the supreme enjoyer. For him, there is no distinction between the material world and the spiritual worlds. The material world is an impediment for the ordinary living entities because they are under its control. But Krishna, being the controller of the material world, has nothing to do with the impediments it offers. Therefore, in different parts of the Upanishads, the Vedas declare, "Brahman is eternal, full of all knowledge and all bliss, but the one Supreme Personality of Godhead is existing in the heart of every living entity." Because of his all-pervasiveness, he is able to enter not only into the hearts of the living entities, but even into the atoms also. As the Supersoul, he's the controller of all activities of the living entities. He's living within all of them and witnessing their actions, allowing them to act according to their desires, and also giving them the results of their different activities. He is the living force of all things, but still he is transcendental to the material qualities. He's omnipotent. He is expert in manufacturing everything, and on account of his superior natural knowledge, he can bring everyone under his control. As such, he's everyone's master. He is sometimes manifest on the surface of the globe, but he is simultaneously within all matter. Desiring to expand himself in multi-forms, he glanced over the material energy, and thus innumerable living entities became manifest. Everything is created by his superior energy, and everything in his creation appears to be perfectly done without deficiency. Those who aspire for liberation from this material world must therefore worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate cause of all causes. He is just like the total mass of earth from which varieties of earthen pots are manufactured. The pots are made of earthy clay. They rest on the earth, and after being destroyed, their elements ultimately merge back into the earth. Although the Personality of Godhead is the original cause of all varieties of manifestation, the impersonalists especially stress Vedic statement, Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. The impersonalists do not take into account the varieties of manifestation emanating from the supreme cause of Brahman. They simply take into consideration that everything emanates from Brahman, and after destruction merges into Brahman, and that the intermediate stage of manifestation is also Brahman. Although the Mayavadis believe that prior to its manifestation the cosmos was in Brahman, after creation it remains in Brahman, and after destruction it merges into Brahman. And the material elements like fire, earth, sky, water, and mind constitute the total cosmic manifestation known as Bhur Bhuva Swa, which is manifested by Govinda. It flourishes on the strength of Govinda, and after annihilation enters into and is conserved in Govinda. Lord Brahma therefore says, I worship Lord Govinda, the original personality, the cause of all causes.